Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series. It's a series where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities, where we get to have an idea of how they've gained their sense of identity and their sense of belonging on their journey. And this week, I say this every week, but we've got a special guest. Our guest this week is Renay Taylor. And Renay Taylor is an executive coach, leadership coach, consultant. She's an author of an amazing book, The Calling of Women, Walking in the God-Given Identity and Calling. Renay, it's an amazing opportunity for us to have you here with us. And I want to just start off by asking you that first question, which I always ask, which is, can you tell me what it was that gave you your sense of identity and your sense of belonging as you were growing up?
Oh, good afternoon, Wayne. It's really great to be on the call, and good afternoon to everyone who's listening or is watching. So as you can hear from my accent, I'm originally from South Africa. And I think, when you're looking at the idea of what gave me a sense of identity and sense of belonging, I mean, we all know the history of South Africa. It's, quite interesting. It's well known. But I came from a mixed ethnicity, mixed racial background in a multicultural society that is South Africa. And coming from that background, Wayne, I think learning to adapt across cultures, across races, across languages. There's about 9% of people in South Africa are of mixed race heritage. So there was always the tension because you're not really part of one group or you're not really part of the other. And because the mixed race group has got such varied backgrounds, really, in terms of cultural heritage, racial heritage, there was always growing up, I think, with a little bit of that tension. But the gift of that was that that multicultural environment, the multicultural society that we were in, taught me to be culturally agile. Mm-hmm. Because often with race comes a cultural paradigm, often. And we have multiple indigenous cultures and languages in South Africa where we all had to learn how to navigate on a daily basis as part of our daily reality. So that was a gift. And that shaped a lot of my sense of identity and belonging. I think my parents as well, who were both also of mixed background, exposed us to various things and ideas. So we were not restricted to a set idea of what we should be, whether that be culturally or racially. And I think they instilled in us that we shouldn't shy away from pursuing what you're passionate about because of any preconceived ideas of what is expected of you. Mm-hmm. Because, or what is perceived by others because of your particular background, as long as you put the work in to make it happen.
Yeah.
So that was really part of my upbringing in South Africa. I did, as part of that whole thing of introducing us to various things and ideas, my parents had a whole stack of the National Geographic magazines, and that sense of the larger world out there, the multicultural diversity that human beings have, the diversity that we have in general, and the various forms of, shall I call it human expression?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw that exploration of that as an adventure that I really wanted to be part of. So it gave me a sense of flexibility, fluidity, adaptability in terms of identity, and the openness to embrace different ideas and ideas of being. So I guess that kind of sums up my background.
So that's great. So basically you're saying that part of that multicultural mix which you had, but also the exposure which your parents gave you to say, look beyond the barriers and boundaries which people place us in. So how did that shape your outlook on what you could be, what you could do? Kind of like through education. What was it that then set you alight to say, you know what, this is what I'm going to try to pursue, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think you learn very early on because kids, they can have set ideas, and if you don't fit into a box, you either get teased or bullied or encouraged. It depends on who comes along your path. If you have a great teacher, who will encourage that. So there were times, yes, growing up that I can think of instances where people say, oh, why are you listening to that music or etc. But we had teachers who would really encourage us and get behind us. And I fell into things. I fell into leadership roles naturally. I got asked to lead things. And that's where I practiced what I thought I liked, what I didn't like, what I was good at, was I really good at leading, etc. And I initially wanted to study medicine. Shall I say that? It did not happen, folks, but I initially did want to study that. But I didn't want to wait 7 years before I could go and explore the world.
Yes.
So it made it, that decision was kind of made in that sense, because I wanted to get out there and explore what I hadn't seen yet. So everything I'd seen in the National Geographic, things I'd read about in the books and that my parents encouraged. So I decided to do nursing, which was a 4-year degree, which was shorter, still within clinical practice. I still got to work with people. And I knew I loved that. I wanted to work with people. And I loved biology. I loved science. So I did that. And that kind of shaped me, but also my impatience. I couldn't wait for the adventure to begin.
I was about to ask that when you said, the 7 years was just too long. It was kind of like, I'm not going to say, are you impatient, but it was kind of like,
I was, yeah.
Yeah, you wanted this, you wanted to get on this journey.
Absolutely.
So you did you went into clinical nursing practice.
Yeah.
What did you enjoy about that, considering your
Yeah.
temperament, the way
Yeah,
that
I
you do?
absolutely. Sometimes when you get into something and you just know you'll love it. So when I started, I did a Bachelor of Nursing degree, Bachelor of Science in Nursing. And I remember doing my first year and my mum having a conversation with my mother, and she said, so what do you think? Do you still want to cross over and maybe change and go into medicine? I said, oh no, I love it. I absolutely loved nursing. I loved the conversations. I loved learning people's different lives, their experiences in life. I loved it. And, I felt like I wouldn't really get that if I was doing medicine, because I'd have less contact time in that sense with people from various backgrounds facing different things in life. I loved it. I absolutely loved nursing once I fell into it. And I wouldn't have known that beforehand until I did it.
So do you think that was almost like an extension of the idea which you were talking about from the National Geographic about understanding those lived experiences? And when you're in the nursing field and you've got the individual and you're getting to know them, is that kind of part of where it came from, plus your love for biology and science?
Yeah, absolutely. I tested the idea of medicine or nursing in some ways. One always has to test. You might have a great idea, but is it really the real thing? So I tested it when I was in school, and I volunteered for the St. John Ambulance. And I ended up leading our particular group in the regional group, and it became the largest group in our city. So there were two things that were tested there. My love of it. Do I really like doing this thing? Do I really like engaging with people and creating an impact in their lives? And do I like leading? So there were three things tested, and I loved it, but it also felt natural. It's not like I sat and I strived to do it because I thought it was a good idea to do. I really loved it. And so that gave me clues as to, what would really fire me up, what created my zone of flow, so to speak. And it absolutely relates to people. I love engaging with people from different backgrounds, experiences, etc. So yes, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
you just touched on something. I don't know if the two of us I don't know if you're reading my mind, but you touched on a question that I wanted to ask, because based on what you had said earlier on, there was something about that people looking at you and seeing leadership qualities in you and you taking the lead. How can you describe how that developed? When did you first start to think, actually, I'm actually quite good at leading people or leading projects or leading activities? Where did that come about?
It's interesting. I always think life leaves clues, and you just need to be aware enough in the moment to pick up the clues or look backwards and start recognizing the clues. But I think I was always taking the lead on something, even as a child. In the family, we have 7 siblings. So I was never I'll sit in the background and just let everyone else do it. I wanted to be there at the forefront as well. So there is a little bit of that. Maybe I was seen as a little bossy when I was just starting school. I don't know. I didn't see it that way. But it certainly was recognized by teachers. So I was always asked to lead something. And if I think at the end of my high school, I didn't do it because I wanted to lead. I just went where my passions led me. So if it was passionate about something, debating, we didn't have a debate society at our school. I formed one, and then I ended up being the president of that. Even though I was younger than some of the students who came in on the debating team, were in higher classes. I wanted to try first aid. I wanted to test out this thing because I was interested in medicine. So I joined the St. John Ambulance. There was none in my region. We created a group under the leadership, obviously, of the largest St. John Ambulance, and it grew. Not because I guess I sat and thought, how do we grow it? I was just very passionate about it. So I just went where my passions went. And I guess I learned that I was good at it along the way. And it was reinforced by others reinforcing that and telling me that I did good at that. So I think life leaves us clues. It's about making sure you pick up on those clues because they tell us about who we are and how we are shaped as an individual.
So let me ask another question based off that then, because you've said about the fact that life leaves clues, and you also mentioned about the siblings.
Yes.
This is important now. Are you at the top, or are you midway through, or are you at the bottom?
Apparently, I'm a typical middle child.
Okay.
So I'm second, and my sister's absolutely different to me. Yeah, so my parents had a little bit of a headache when I came along, and my mom told me that. I wasn't as compliant.
I just wanted to make sure, right? I just wanted to make sure. So that's really good. But it sounds like in the same vein, you were always not necessarily looking for leadership positions, but people recognize those qualities. And because of that, you were comfortable in saying, I can lead people. People will respect and follow what I say necessarily. So how did you transition from kind of like leading in nursing to the activities which you're kind of like engaged with now?
Right. It's an interesting journey. It may not be everyone's journey, but my journey was definitely not linear. It took little segues, I guess. It could be seen as segues, but for me, it makes sense. It makes absolute sense. So my first contact with Imperial really was when I worked with it in the Imperial Trust, the NHS trusts. And then I did my master's, so Master in Science with Imperial. And I moved on to then work with Imperial as an employee, as a clinical researcher with respiratory medicine. So that was my first, kind of connection with the Imperial family. And it was that role. I wouldn't have known it. Now, I did my master's because I wanted to learn more. I wanted to go into in-depth study of a particular subject. And I thought, it could possibly help me elevate where I was in my career. But I had no idea where it would lead. It led to the role as a clinical researcher. And so I worked as a clinical researcher, and then I felt I've been in the UK for several years now. Maybe it's time to explore another country. So I've always said have the courage to try something new. And I guess that's the same for leadership. I've always just had the courage to ask a difficult question or to say, what about something new? Suggest something that maybe, the group doesn't necessarily suggest. So courage in that sense. And then after that, when I worked with Imperial as a clinical researcher, I decided I wanted to go to Asia.
But why Asia?
So I had traveled through Asia.
Right.
I did not know I was coming back. And again, life is very unpredictable. You never know. So my motto is don't try to plan too far ahead. For me, that suits me. May not suit everyone, but try not to plan too far ahead because life will always throw you surprises. And if you're too fixed on one idea, you could miss a massive opportunity.
That's right.
And so I decided I wanted to explore Asia again. I traveled through it. It was interesting. I wouldn't mind challenging myself in an environment that is so foreign to me in terms of culture, language. I didn't speak a word of Chinese. And so I went to China. And so I resigned from my job and then started to look for a position
Okay.
in China.
Yeah.
And then got one. I remember 2 weeks before my final work date, I was offered this position in China. And so I left and I did not know why. I just wanted to get to China. So whatever job would take me there that would suit my skill set,
Yeah.
I would take. And I took a position totally left field, which was the startup of an engineering program, joint international program between the University of Michigan and Shanghai Jiaotong Daxue. So I experienced a whole new window in my career. I thrived because it took advantage of the skill sets I have. I didn't know I would. I knew nothing about engineering, but I learned. And it was so exciting. And that decision led to a job opportunity in Singapore 5 years later.
Right.
Because of that experience, which I never knew I would have, I never would have predicted, of starting up. I think we were a team of 6 when we started in Shanghai and had built it into a school with a huge program. That led to a position in Singapore with the startup of a medical school between Imperial. So I came right back to the Imperial family again. And so that was another adventure as well. But I would never have been able to predict that that's what I would get involved in. And neither would I have been able to predict it when I made the decision I want to go to China. I didn't know what I would do there, but I wanted to go there and make it happen.
So you were there in China, culturally, a different culture. I know that you like the exploration of culture.
Yeah.
But what about I'm going to go back to the idea of that sense of identity, sense of belonging.
Yeah.
As a woman in China, don't speak the language. How was that for you? How did you navigate the space? How were you welcomed into the space? How did people interact with you in that space? I suspect that could be quite challenging.
Absolutely. Nothing puts up a mirror to who you think you are than when you go and you plonk yourself in the middle of a culture that's not your own. And that's really where you are forced to do the deep dive thinking of who am I really? The subconscious things that you don't think about, that you think you are, you really have to try and test them. When you are not part of the larger culture, you are a minority culture in that sense. That's, I think, when you really get to know yourself. You don't get to know yourself in a group that knows supposedly who you are. You really get to know yourself when you're outside of that group and you are the foreigner, the alien aspect coming in. And you think, okay, what's different? Is it different? Am I really what I thought I was? Because I'm testing it here. And is it true? If I say I'm quite forgiving, I'm laid back, am I really? When I meet this culture who opposite, and it tests that particular characteristic that I believe I am. So it was very challenging because I was naive. I didn't know the language. So I'd made several hops. My first hop was from South Africa to the UK, very different culture. And then from the UK, South Africans are much more direct. So that's one of the obvious cultural differences. China was even less direct than the UK. So if I thought I had tried to adapt in the UK, I really had to adapt to that. I didn't have a choice. I didn't speak the language. I was really, in that sense, culturally naive, even if I had traveled through the whole of China before. So it was a challenge. It was a real challenge in the beginning. But at the end of the day, people are people. And I think I've always stuck to that. Human beings are human beings. People are people, always. And there's always a commonality a humanity that you can connect with, even if you don't even speak the same language and you're not connecting in that sense verbally, by explaining yourself. I think definitely that's been my stance. It's about trying to connect to the humanity of people, and realizing that everything you bring is not always positive. So every culture has a positive and a negative.
Yeah.
And you learn that as you go along, what is perceived as positive and negative, where you are going.
I love that idea about people are people and connecting through something which is outside of your comfort zone. That if you're totally comfortable within something, you're not necessarily being able to stretch who you are to see who you can become, if that makes
Absolutely.
yeah. So having that challenge actually challenges your own self, your own value system, and how authentic are you to the things which you say you are authentic to. So it clearly, from what you had said about your time in China, it kind of like was like a holding up a mirror to yourself
Absolutely.
and saying, okay, am I happy with this? Do I need to change, or how do I need to adapt in order to be more connected with the other humans or the other people around me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were there in China for 5 years, and then you went to Singapore.
And then I went to Singapore.
So again, there's a slight cultural difference there as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
so it just seems like I can see a wall of badges, and I've been there. I understand those cultures. So how did you, in adapting to these different cultures or trying to adapt to these cultures, what would you say about how it influenced or yeah, how it influenced your ideas about sense of belonging? Did you
Mm.
ever feel that there was a culture that you could say, I really belonged in that culture? Or was it a case that not necessarily to say that you felt that you belonged, but I understand the culture enough to be accepted within that cultural place where I am? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think there are two things here. The first thing that I did not know, and I wouldn't have known until I traveled outside of South Africa, was my mixed heritage. It was almost like it helped me to come in much more softly. So wherever I traveled, somebody thought they identified with me. So my look was ambiguous in that sense. So Latin America, they thought I would be Latin American. And I did not know this. I did not know what I looked like, just if that makes any sense. You grow up with people who look like you don't know any different. And so I don't see any of that. But when I traveled, I realized people thought I was part of them or half of them.
Yeah.
And it happened everywhere I went. So when I went to China, they thought I might have had some Asian background in me. I do not, but I can see why people thought that.
Yeah.
And now looking back, I also look at those with those same eyes to my family and see that as well. But I didn't see that until I traveled. So there is that. It gave me a softer in. I wasn't perceived as vastly different to the culture I was moving into. So that was the one thing that I learned to my surprise. The other was, but then of course, once you start working with people, the cultural differences are obvious, right? The other thing is that every culture I've been in has had something that has shaped me. So they have changed me, and I've assimilated some of that. I've always believed nothing is really by accident. Yes, you make choices, but if you are in a place, it's a gift. If you are within a group of people, they are a gift, and they help you evolve to who you become or who you are eventually. You are the sum of all of those parts, really. So every culture has actually helped me to evolve into who I am without losing the central core of what I came with, my country of birth, my upbringing, etc., without losing, but maybe chipping off the edges adding a little color here and there, you know, that's what it's done. I've never seen it as an us and them situation, unless there was a particular cultural or social preference that really, really went against my grain.
Yeah.
For example, then the difference would be very tangible for me. But in general, people and places that you end up in, they are a gift. They are what shape you and make you who you are. I think maybe what I'm trying to say is it's always healthy to have a loose sense of attachment to a fixed idea of who you are, because that kind of fixed mentality just doesn't allow for you to see things sometimes.
You know, as you were describing that, I was thinking about a sponge and how if you put a sponge in different colors of dye, that wherever it touches the sponge will absorb it and it will take on that element. But it hasn't changed the fundamental principles of the sponge itself. But you're just, you can say, adapting or assimilating or taking on board, and that then becomes part of who you are.
Absolutely.
And I think that from what you said, and it's having the willingness to be able to say, I'm willing to not be fixed in my outlook, but be happy to take on board characteristic understandings of other cultures, because it enriches us and makes us better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's beneficial. I mean, you make choices, obviously, you make value choices as to what you believe is beneficial, not because you prefer it, but you really look at it and say, is it beneficial? Is it something that is good? Rather than I prefer certain things just because I'm sticking to one mindset about what I believe I am, what I believe the world is at its best. Everything and everyone really adds to something that makes something beautiful. You know, every culture and every place adds to the bigger picture of what's rich about our world. So yeah, so that's what traveling has taught me. And it's helped me, I think, to be a much better teammate in the workplace and a much better leader. And it's helped me to be less impatient, which was my natural instinct, you know, when I was less mature. But taking that stance, because you will try and test it and you will not succeed. If you try and keep banging against walls that you're not willing to shift in, you will not succeed. So it's helped me mature in that sense and brought me a lot of patience. China taught me a lot of patience.
I can well imagine the mere fact that you didn't know the language, for one, you know, you have to be patient in trying to get your message across, because if you start getting angry because they don't understand, they're not going to help you. And that's about connecting people. A smile goes a long way, especially when you don't understand. Smile and stop frowning. So you know, so tell me how then, because it appears that you've done a lot. And I do like the part where you're talking about the leadership and how it's made you a better leader, right? What advice would you give to other leaders when we're talking about increasing diversity of groups and stuff like that, and people are quite fixed in their mindset about what is valuable, what is merit, what is acceptable? How would you advise? Because I know that you're a leadership coach. So what advice do you give to your, I know we're on the clock now, but what advice would you give to leaders about how they make groups which are more inclusive and which are more dynamic and which are much more productive? How would you advise them in that sense?
I think firstly, raise your own self-awareness. And that's a maturing process, you know. It takes time, but it also takes intention. Just raise your own self-awareness. Am I really good at the things I think I'm good at? Be honest with yourself, like brutally honest. What are my strengths and my skill sets? You know, not everyone can do this thing, but you may be good at another thing. if you are much better as a follower with a set program, be honest with yourself. There's nothing worse than somebody who's ambitious and gets to somewhere, but they don't have the skill set for that leadership position. They just got there through pure ambition. Be really honest with them. How are you shaped? How are you built? What makes you really thrive? So raise the self-awareness. Accept the fact that not everything you bring to the table is good. In other words, you have some parts that need to be shaved off as well. So yes, you can bring your authentic self, but your authentic self better be the parts that is really good, beneficial to the table. Be very, and try and constantly not that you beat yourself over there, but be honest about what it is that you bring, the good and the bad, and try to focus on building those strengths and then minimizing your weaknesses. You may never get rid of them. I will always be slightly impatient, but I use that as my strength. When I know things need to be hurried up, we need to work on this because it's the right thing to do right now. So I think that's important. The other thing I would say is that character matters. Technical skill, subject matter know-how, you can learn that. And some of us are faster than others at learning and picking up something new. But character really matters, especially if you are crossing different groups, mindsets, cultures, backgrounds. You have no idea where your teammates are coming from, what triggers them, what doesn't trigger them. And I think character matters. It's probably the ingredient for sustainability long term.
Let me just quiz you on that then a little bit to ask the question, what do you mean when you say character? Because oftentimes people will say that character and they'll give a series of adjectives describing somebody, right? So what do you mean when you say character matters?
It's how you view others. It's an other-centeredness. It's not just about you. I think that's the one thing. The other is the sense of integrity. Your word is your word, and people can see that. It may be behind the scenes, but it's picked up eventually. They can predict where you're going to go because your ethics are clear, your values are clear, your morals are clear. I think that's important because if you lead that way, even if no one else does, you can live, and at least that's my belief, and that's what I would hold on to for my own life as well, is that you can get to the end of your life and not look back with regret, because at the time you did the best thing according to what you believe was the right thing and was beneficial for all, for the greater good. So that's what I mean by character. Be the type of person that is trustworthy, that's reliable, that has integrity, and most importantly, integrity.
Okay, I like that. I agree with that 100% because your word is your bond, your integrity. Because I think about statements which we hear about our values are X, Y, and Z, but then the values, you don't necessarily see those values being lived out. Yeah. So when we talk about the authentic self, if your authentic value system is the way that you live your life, then you will be able to interact with and connect with people because you'll have, as you said, that people-centered approach, you know. So I'm just thinking now in terms of within all of those adventures that you've had, and I'm going to call them adventures because it seems to me from the day you picked up that book, the National Geographic, you've been on a different adventure. You want to see something else. You want to do something else. And that motivates you. So where to next? What are you doing now? Because we could mention about your book, which you published last year. What was the drive, the motivation for a book like that? And where to next for you?
It's interesting. More than my ethnic or racial or cultural identity was my gender. So you walk in and there's perceptions of what you can achieve, how you will act because you are a woman. And so for me, that's was one experience that was a thread throughout my life, what we can and cannot do, what people think we can and cannot do, what we think we can and cannot do based on, whatever narrative we grew up with. So I think that's been a consistent. And so I work with a lot of women on building that and empowering that sense of identity, and the strengths we can bring to the table as women in all our diversity. So that's always been a strong point for me. And wherever I went, including in China, I always tried to bring that out. So empowerment, but especially with women. So that's one trend. I work with clients of both genders, but that is one trend that has always stayed with me. And I think being the type of person that I was, I would ask when I was a child, why and why not? Why can I not? So, so that's always been a part of, I guess, my personality as well. And it stayed with me. So the book came from that I was leading women's groups, I was coaching women, and those questions came from years of doing that, the same questions. Why are we here? What can we contribute? What are the things that are holding us back? Should we allow them to hold us back? Yes or no? Is it reasonable? How do we navigate that? So that's where that book came from. I naturally fell into coaching because I did a leadership. Again, I was asked to be part of a leadership program, which was a year long in 2004. And then part of that, I was introduced to coaching. And I loved it. I had no idea. I didn't know what it was. I'd never heard of it before. And I absolutely loved it. So when I made the move to China, I actually took that skill set with me and I used it within my workplace. So I did a lot of, kind of coaching with my team. I did a lot of leadership training, which, was always a bit of a challenge in China to do that topic. But I did it. I found a way of doing that because it was something I was passionate about. So I stuck to the things that I knew I was passionate about. And so it's carried me through. And so when I came back from Asia, back to the United Kingdom, that's when I went and actually registered my own coaching company and started doing that. So I am coaching individuals and I also work with groups and organizations, and I love it. But it always comes back to all your skill set coming back. And I felt that coaching did that. It brought all my experience back into one thing, and I could bring all of that when working with clients. It's the human interaction. It's finding people with different stories, different narratives, different backgrounds, different experiences. And my clients are global, so they come from various ethnic groups and nationalities. And all of that experience comes back into this. So it's a gift again for me. It really is a gift because I'm able to explore what makes me passionate about the world with my clients.
I think that's brilliant. I do think that's brilliant. I like the idea of being able to. Coaching is also about active listening to what individuals have said and helping, not telling them what they need to do, but helping them to find a pathway through what might seem the wood for the trees, finding that direction. And you're just facilitating their journey, but you're making a major impact in that process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm going to just see if there's anyone who wants to ask a question. I still have plenty more questions to ask. But if there is anyone who does want to ask a question, now is the time that you can ask or raise your hand and I'll come to you. But I was really interested. I'm going to just go back about this leadership coaching, etc., and being a woman in leadership. Yeah. And the challenges of being a woman in leadership that overcoming those barriers and being a woman of color in positions of leadership. How have you navigated that space? Because I know it can be incredibly challenging.
Absolutely. I mean, I've had comments made that you just think, would you be saying that comment if I was a man? And would you be saying that comment if I was not who I am racially? So I've had very direct comments that you sit back and you just think, wow, why is it that easy for someone to say that to me? So, you know, we talk about microaggressions and then macroaggressions. I've certainly had that as well. Interestingly, when I went to Asia, my passport, so I by that stage I was a British citizen. My
Mhm.
passport had a very wiped out picture of me. So I looked a lot paler than I actually am in real life. And I didn't know this until a year after I landed, that the HR were asking, oh, what is my race?
Ah,
Because I'm not sure they were sure they wanted to hire somebody who was not white. And my name confuses people too. I did not know this. Again, I just went in blind and I just navigated there. But I became really close with my team there. So again, you know, it's about always focusing on how can I connect with people authentically, not trying too hard, not reading a book about what the culture is and then pigeonholing those people according to this book's description, but just going in and learning and growing the art of how to just see people for who they are and connecting on that level.
what you just said there is so perceptive in terms of the idea of that ambiguity caused confusion in people's minds, in that your name and the appearance, and they didn't know where to put you because
I
people,
see.
I think, where to place you. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think that's what stereotypes and biases do, is we want to place people in particular areas so that we can, I don't want to say it, but sometimes we other people because we say
absolutely.
because of these characteristics,
Yeah,
they must be like that.
yeah,
And it's not until we start to have those discussions or have discussions that we actually then see the reality of the connections and the connectivities that are possible.
yeah,
So I think going forward, it is about us coming to a place where we can actually be comfortable in having those discussions in an open, honest way to find out about what other people can bring to, but what it is that makes up other people's identities, makes them who they are. And until we
absolutely.
get to that stage, we're always going to be almost like at loggerheads, you
Yeah.
know?
And I think try and be less sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that by saying just give in and just let things be and, you know, not create a ruckus.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean is try and be less sensitive about the faux pas that people make
Mm-hmm.
with regards to address them, but address them always with the understanding that people, once they get understanding, hopefully they will get to the other side and they will grow in their ideas and their expectations and their perceptions. Of course, there is also that thing when an environment doesn't want you, don't hang around. So you have to choose your battles. Don't hang around. So if this is a battle that needs fighting, fine. But if it's not, and you can fight the same battle on less hostile ground, move on.
Yeah.
Just leave them be in their little small
Yeah.
circumscribed mindset. That's fine. Move on. So it's about in the moment being aware rather than throwing it all out there and trying to fight that battle and make a point of it. Sometimes it's wise to know that this is not the right environment for you. Move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to ask my final two questions then. And those final two questions are, what advice would you give to your younger self? And kind of like opposite or the counter to that, what do you think your younger self would look at you now and say, wow?
Can I start with the last one?
Yeah.
My younger self would say, you were what? I came to the UK for 1 to 2 years of travel. It was central. I could travel everywhere from the UK, Europe, Latin America. And 27 years later, I had no idea I'd still be here and call London my home. So that's a while. I would never have predicted that the decision to do a master's would lead to this, would lead to this, would lead. I would never have predicted that I would be living in Asia for 7 years. It doesn't mean I wouldn't have wanted and it wouldn't have been a good idea as a kid, but I would never have known what was possible. I
Yeah.
think that is the wow, really? That happened?
Mhm.
I still think, wow, that happened. um, that happened that I like that food now. And I think it's part of my cuisine, because I brought it and I loved it and I learned it there and I saw it there. So that's a wow. I wanted to experience the adventure that life and that the world offers, but I never would have been able to predict how it would pan out
Mhm.
and if and how much of it would pan out. Your first question, what advice would I give to my younger self? Okay, number one, I think life is unpredictable and it's so unexpected. There's no one size fits all path in life. So learn to embrace the unexpected. Nothing, I guess nothing new, interesting, or even adventurous comes from comfort zones.
Mm.
So embrace. Always have hope. If
Mm.
you think about where I came from, we weren't allowed to even move geographically to certain parts of the city, to certain beaches. We weren't allowed to just move freely. And who would have known that that would be a possibility, that I could just move everywhere and then also move everywhere and just come in a soft way.
Yeah.
So there is always hope. So I've learned that. And again, moving different sectors in my job, there is always hope. There is a season for absolutely all things under the sun, a time to sow and a time to reap. I didn't know I would sow that much and reap that much in those years that I was in Asia, in the years that I'm in the UK. Yeah, there's a time to be fruitful and then there's a time to rest. In other words, when we build our lives, it's not all about a linear path going upwards, bigger, 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 in the traditional sense that others would perceive as bigger. It's about just going to a place and to opportunities that provide that fulfillment, that stretch you, that grow you, that match your passions. I think that's my philosophy. So that's the advice I would give my younger self. Always have hope. Things will work out. Okay. And then maybe from my life experiences, learn from all the lessons that each of life's circumstances and the seasons will teach you. These are gifts in life, and they are useful for the life that you are shaped to live, ultimately.
Fantastic message, which is resonating through everything that you've said, is always keep growing. And the only way that you can keep growing is by staying curious, and
Yes.
don't settle for just what you have, and not in a negative way, in saying, oh, I always want more. Don't settle for saying this is all I can be. I can be more by experiencing more. And I think that's, from what you're saying to me, that adventurous spirit, those National Geographics. I don't know what ones you were reading back then, but they gave you that zeal.
Yeah.
But your mum would probably say she was always like that, even before we gave her the National Geographic books. you know, but it's been wonderful hearing your story, understanding who Renay Taylor is, because it's definitely opened my eyes to the possibilities, or greater possibilities, just by taking the time to engage, just by taking the time to connect with people and to understand their stories. So Renay, I want to just say again a very big thank you for the time that you've spent and sharing your sense of identity and belonging with us this week. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for having me on. It's been a pleasure chatting to you as well. It's always nice, isn't it, to look back, and again, I've learned a bit about myself in this exchange. So there you go.
Fantastic. Right, I'm gonna just let people know what's happening next week. It will be next week. We're going to have Titalola Olayedi, and she was awarded the Young Woman Engineer of the Year last year, and she's also a senior process safety engineer at Supercritical Solutions. So she's going to be our guest next week, and you'll note that the time is slightly earlier at 12 till 1 next week. And if you haven't been able to see any of the other interviews or this interview itself, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. So you'll be able to see the many other videos of people who have been willing to share their stories and identities. So I say this every week. I'm really thankful for everybody. This was our first 100. We're approaching 200 guests that we've had now, and each one have helped me to gain a greater understanding of the human experience, the lived experience of how we gain our sense of identity and our sense of belonging. So until next week, please stay safe, enjoy the hot weather while it's here, and don't lose the opportunity to help to find out where and how you belong. So until next week, thanks and goodbye.